I'm very happy to introduce a true profound master of martial arts and dear friend of mine, James Carrs, C-A-R-S-S, correct, James? Very important.
Well done, Bey. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, you know, like kind of like 10 misspellings later, here we are. And I have to say, it feels like coming home because literally, James was a wonderful host to us earlier this year, right? We were up in Northumberland having an amazing time. So anyway, thank you for joining the first Martial Club convention. Wonderful to have you here. And I thought the first question I would have is, I think there's been a sense after the kind of the transformation of the martial art world brought about by the Gracies and UFC and MMA, people often say to me, isn't all of that other earlier practice now antiquated the way that a horse and cart was when we had the combustion engine? So I'm curious, because you're interesting, because you've got such a profound background in the pugilistic arts and in, you know, kind of actual applied martial art combat. And yet you've maintained this kind of like loyalty to I-Chuan. So can you talk a bit about that? What is the relevance of I-Chuan as a practice and as a martial art in the modern world?
Sure. And I think, yeah, over the last few years, as you kind of hinted at, there has been a bit of a decay in traditional Chinese martial arts and almost a bit of a loss of credibility with, you know, UFC and MMA and BJJ coming through. And then we've had these terrible sort of challenges that have occurred in China, where you've had, you know, individuals who've been, let's just say, less than well equipped and prepared and maybe not expecting the realities of what to happen. And I think for me, it's very clear, you know, you have to always look to the past for lessons. In Chinese martial arts is like Chinese history, has been through many phases and many turns in history. And of course, we have what is known as modern wushu, a performance art, which is still based on the past and has very, you know, elements of traditional Chinese martial arts, is wonderfully athletic. So I have a lot of, you know, respect for those athletes that practice that and do that. But it's very, very different from what they practiced before, which is, you know, really goes back to the founding of I-Chuan, which was 100 years ago, in the 1920s, which was what we call the Republican era in Chinese martial arts. When it was, this is just before the Second World War, you know, 20 years before, when it was very combative. They were still practicing contact, sparring. They weren't performance arts at that time. They were military martial arts. Paul, who just did a, you know, fantastic demonstration there, and taught, he mentioned Ying Yi-Kun or Xing Yi-Chuan, which he's practiced a lot as well, which was a military martial art, and as he rightly says, you know, was based on the spear, and based on taking ground, and occupying your opponent's space. So when you look at the history of I-Chuan or I-Kun, when we say in Cantonese, mind, intention, fist, it came from Xing Yi-Chuan. So the founder.
Yeah, I'm interested because I think that you're hitting the nail on the head, because as soon as you have a battlefield martial art coming up against a sport with rules, however loose the rules might be, they still exist. On paper, the battlefield martial art should win because there are no rules and no limitations to what you can do in combat. So this, my question for you is, because you mentioned earlier, there's these awful videos going around of supposed masters being humiliated, not just beaten, humiliated by trained MMA fighters. So what's going wrong?
Well, I think, as you said there, you know, if you practiced a battlefield martial art, no rules, anything goes, it should, in theory, defeat somebody who practices a combat art. The difference is, or what goes wrong, is people who practice the battlefield arts in general these days, they don't tend to fight. So it's a bit like dressing up in a Civil War enactment, and putting on knights outfits but not using real swords. So we have a lot of and there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you enjoy doing and how you enjoy spending your Sundays. But the problem develops when you think that could act, or you kid yourself, or you get into a kind of fantasist type of area that,
Yeah.
you know, these arts, because they're esteemed in this fantastic history, and you've had these wonderful masters before with all these stories of them defeating foreign boxers, and Bok Yun Gap, we've mentioned, Wang Shanjai, who's a fantastic story from I-Chuan. You know, there's so many of them. You suddenly think, because you're practicing elements of what they did, but in a very safe, modern way without contact, that you're going to develop some combat ability by default. And of course, it doesn't happen. And we've seen it in these fights very quickly. So as soon as that punch in the face, I mean, you know, it's a great quote, isn't it, by Mike Tyson? Everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face.
Absolutely.
Or I think punch until you get planned in the face.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I think that a lot of outside, and they're not even talking about practicing martial artists, but like a perception, which is they would see a form, like the forms that you practice diligently, and then they see what they perceive to be real fighting, and they can't see the connection. So what if now for us, could you show some of a traditional form, and then maybe with your student to show how that would be used in that battlefield approach that you're talking about?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, obviously I will, because if we go into the difference of I-Chuan and Xing I-Chuan, I-Chuan in theory is a formless art that is without form. So I couldn't show you any form from I-Chuan, but I can. We in our branch of I-Chuan, because it's an old one, we still practice the original Xing I-Chuan, which is
I remember when I came and did a little bit of practice with you when we were there, and just the idea that you would have a currently competing kickboxer coming to learn I-Chuan was really surprising. So could you just show us what you can show us of the link?
Yeah, I will show both actually. I'll demonstrate kind of by myself first of all. As many of you will know, with I-Chuan, it's based on static postures to build the engine of the system, which we call Jam Zhong. So typically, this would be an exercise of standing for a period of time, holding here, okay? Or I'm actually sitting. The mind aspect of I-Chuan, which is the Yi, okay, which is the intent. It's not some people might think a standing meditation of me just going away and drifting off without anything. It's a very dynamic exercise which requires a lot of thought, or Yi, or intent from my mind. So I'm actually thinking about absorbing, opening the joints of my body, stretching my tendons, and holding. So we use some imagery to help us within that, which is part of the training process. So I made the classic would be kind of holding a ball. I'm thinking of a large Swiss ball or balloon in here, and that ball expanding, and I'm gently squeezing it. So we have various postures like that and transitions between them. So I can move down to here and have a sort of lower Jam Zhong here, then take my arms out here, all of the time building that structure of my body. And I would hold each individual posture for, 5-10 minutes. And there's many of them. Now, you would look at that and think, well, what would be the application of that to combat? Well, first of all, you're building the mind-body connection. You're also building on the physical basis with that tendon strength, whole body power, alignment, and structure. People say that you can't run before you can walk, but actually before you can walk, you need to be able to stand. You need to be able to align the body, the skeleton, the joints, the bones, etc., etc. So with a posture like this, for example, looks like I'm just meditating or holding the ball. Originally, this came from Xing I-Chuan, Jun-Chuan, which is a lifting punch, like an uppercut here, okay? So this position here, the first thing they teach us in any combat sport or any combat art should be to defend yourself. It's a self-defense. So the first thing is normally to bring your arms up, okay, to lift your arms. So this movement here is based on that. If I borrow Jack for a moment, who I know we're going to talk to later on. And I can show some of the applications of the jam, and also the step back a little bit here. So from a position here, if Jack was going to hit me here, okay, I can obviously defend with my arm here. Now, when I was showing this position down here as well, this would be leverage, okay, of me to use my weight I'll show it this side a little bit more here. So Jack comes through here. Rather than me hitting his arm like that, what I'm going to do now, I don't like demonstrations where people leave their arm out. We want to retract. So we will do it a little bit faster in a moment because I'm not too keen on that, but I'm just demonstrating the concept of it first. That a transition from a jam jong here, all I would need in reality is a little bit of thinking to take his structure there and then be able to do hit or whatever I want to do from there. So that is not a technique per se, but teaching me how to rewire my body to use my body force and be able to apply leverage and weight into him, that when his arm's out here and I do that, it has this effect on his body. I'm keeping my center, but I'm applying my body weight into that position there. Now, if he throws a slightly faster punch, we could do that this way. Or we'll do it from here. Jack punches. In slow motion, my jam jong's coming here. I'm turning my hands here and then stepping and sliding. At no point am I blocking, doing any large movement. I'm keeping that elbow control there. So it comes through and we're here. So it's a very combat, practical side. We have a jam jong like this. Okay, or I sit down and I'm working on 6 directions of force. Left, right, forward, backwards. Now we can hold that in a static position, and we can also do very small micro movements, which we call si li in Cantonese or shili in Mandarin. Okay, working through the 6 directions of force. Now, again, you would look at that and think, I'm not too convinced on the combat application of that. No one's going to come through. What I'm working on here is crossing force, left and right force within this position here by building the static, almost like isometric. So you're working on tendon strength from that, but you're also uniting, as I've mentioned, the mind and the body. So that could come if my arms are in this position here and Jack comes through, then I'm here to be able to defend. He comes through again. It's the same thing. So it's this left and right power to be able to move and strike. Okay. That's again demonstration of the different levels of force that we might have within I-Chuan. Okay, you had the 5 fists. You also have the 12 animals. So you would have a technique like let's take for example the snake. Okay, snake form from Xingyi looks something like that. Within I-Chuan, that became more simplified by one of my Sigongs, Han Sing Q, who took the position to here. Okay, if we're in, let's say Jack is a professional Muay Thai fighter, so he does a lot of clinching. So we do a lot of work within that position there, and I'll have him doing exercises like teacups. Okay, so Jack, if you just demonstrate a very basic teacup exercise. Some people call this swimming body. We see a lot of these kind of movements in Bagwai Jan, like this kind of movement as well. This is a simplified I-Chuan perspective on it. So if we're in a clinch, I'm here and I'm there. So we can apply this sensitivity like this way. Well, we keep contact. And then what I'm going to do is come on 2 hands here, and Jack's then going to show how he uses the snake. Coming up over the top, down, pressing his body weight whilst keeping his center onto me, and I keep doing it here. So that would be an application of snakes into a practical situation, like a grapple or a clinch. Because each one is about building whole body power, I've done a lot of work with Jack in terms of being able to improve his basic punching power. So if you demonstrate one of our punching exercises that we do. So this here, Jam Jong can turn into a punch very, very quickly. Like what Jack is doing is keeping his lower body stable here, turning his shoulder and waist, and he's still keeping the aspect of holding the ball, keeping his structure, his fighting guard, as he just turns. Now, what this exercise is teaching him is how to use his body properly, which is the alignment of turning his shoulder and waist together. He's not moving his elbows, he's keeping them static. He's keeping that feeling of holding the ball, which he can very much put into his Muay Thai guard at the same time. Now, how we produce power from store and release and how we let that power leave the body is that we very much work on a fast release, not kind of a lot of martial arts where they hit at the last moment and then they tense up like that. So when Jack's pulling he's using his mind. These are the mental aspects of using I-Chuan to hold the ball here, turn. This side here is very strong. So I can apply my body weight through here. He can absorb. Here's very loose. This is his hitting hand. Okay? It's not tight. It's not hard. It's loose because it's a conduit for the force coming through his body, which is coming from the floor up his posterior chain, through his hamstrings, glutes back, traveling right to the very end of that fist. Okay, so if I ask Jack to glove up for a moment, I'll just put my hat on. One of the aspects of working with a fighter like Jack as well is that when we first started working together more than a year ago, one of his primary intentions was, because he'd have a habit, often when he was winning a fight, to get a little bit overexcited, as we do when we fight. We have practical fighting experience, and some of the discipline of the guard would start to go. And he had been caught in his last fight after putting his opponent down by a spinning elbow, wasn't it?
Yeah, I ran into spin
but yeah, by that. So we do a lot of work on the mindfulness of holding that guard and holding that jam jong, and then also on being able to produce relaxed power through that. So he takes this into his Muay Thai stance. Okay, so he's not now doing I-Chuan techniques, but because Muay Thai is a sport, it has a different engine, there's a different way to work. He's taking the principles of what we train to implement it and then use it. So in his guard, which is a little bit different from an I-Chuan guard, because he needs to be able to do the stuff here, to knee, to elbow, to kick, to move in a different way within the context of a ring. But when he is thinking about hitting with his hand, I want him having this structure on his guard here, and I want this nice and loose and springy. So what we have there is, and I can feel on my elbow, is a very relaxed, heavy punch. Okay, so we're able to implement some of the ideas of Chinese martial arts and work with them to enhance the combat sport. Okay, so that gives you some example around that. So there's many ways we do that.
Let's bring Jack into the conversation. If he can sit next. Do you have two chairs? Or you can just do his horse stance. Either way is fine. But there you go. So Jack, thank you for taking time to come in today. I really appreciate it. No problem. You're so interesting to me, and I think to a lot of our other, kind of the participants today, because you are the guy who we normally hear telling us that what James does is completely outdated and useless. And yet here you are, kind of emptying your cup, and you're practicing with him. So this is really interesting. So can you just tell us a little bit of the history, how you first heard about what James was doing? Were you skeptical? And then what was your initial experience like?
Well, first, my coach actually brought James to the gym to show me what I-Chuan was and everything. And straight away, I sort of clicked a little bit with James. And I just realized this could be very useful for me because, like I say, if you're fighting for 3 minutes at a time, you've got to keep mindful and, in control of your emotions and your body. Whereas I have the habit of getting over carried away and losing my form and things like that. But straight away, James would do a lot of movements for time, which is, like you say, it's not just standing still. I'm concentrating on what I'm doing the whole time. So it's keeping mindful and knowing my body position the whole time. And when I first met James, it was just something I thought this could be very, very useful for me, someone who gets overexcited and loses form or loses structure. So we started doing some basic holds, and it was very testing the first time I'd done it, because standing, holding some stress positions for 5 minutes at a time is it's not easy. Everyone thinks it's. I
remember the little taste we all had in his backyard. Absolutely right.
Yeah,
so, and Sean as well.
He trained me and a few of the other coaches and other professional fighters who couldn't do some basic movements. So the coordination and the strength and everything that comes with it's very, very supplementary to normal fighting art. I mean, normal combat sports art. So it was just something that I thought this is very useful. And I've been training with James, and I've noticed a massive difference in my strength and my strike power and just my mindfulness. And I'm managing to keep focused for like more than 3 minutes, 10 minutes at a time, just
That's
endless. It's just a massive improvement.
So initially, when you first heard, oh, there's this master of I-Chuan, some obscure Chinese martial art is coming to our Muay Thai gym to teach us. When you heard that news, were you initially skeptical?
But at first I was thinking, you know, what could he show us that I don't know? I know how to punch, I know how to kick, I know how to knee, I know how to elbow. But then when he came in, it was
Right.
quite the opposite of that. It was
So maybe the answer to my question is like why there is this disconnect, because I mean, you know, you talk to kickboxers and MMA people and they say that the old school stuff, maybe the problem is that they've never actually done what you did, which is take the plunge and experience it. They just look at maybe these videos from China and they go, you see, it's useless, and that's it. So can you give me an example? Sure. I mean, practically, obviously, in the ring, what was there a technical, or it was the mental intention approach, but what changed when you got into the ring to fight, having trained with James?
Definitely the mental approach. Obviously increased power, but in better balance and form and stuff like that. But definitely the mental side of it. It allowed me to have more control in my mind.
Yeah.
It's hard to put it across, but I know they just have mindfulness of where my body is the whole time, rather than, because I think anybody in some sort of form, when they get tired, they'll lose form, in fight. But I've just found where even when I was tired, I was managing to maintain my position and hold my form a lot more. And I think that's just thanks to James. And plus, like I say, I've came into it with a very open mind. I don't think there's any right way or wrong way of doing things, and I don't think any martial art is better than another martial art. Totally depends on the individual and how much they put into it. But like I say, I think the mindfulness of I-Chuan or I-Chuan is what's helped me the most, is in being concentrating and being so coordinated. And it's
interesting because I you know, remember I'm really quite young, realizing that you are old for a lot longer than you're young. And what I mean is that, you know, you're born and then you get to 30, 40. And then if people live to be 80, like we just had my dad on, my stepfather from Australia, who's doing karate, and he's 81, right? And I hope he's still doing it for another 10 years. So it's interesting because I feel that a lot of these arts, and even Thai boxing, maybe include as MMA in this, it's really about you're destroying somebody else's health and maybe your own. And you'll be really good for that window of time from mid-late teens till 30, whenever I don't know, when is the end of the life career normally of a professional kickboxer?
In Muay Thai, depends how young you start. Like you say, the average people will retire mid-30s because
right,
you know, really
exactly. So by my calculation, because my dad was a lot older than probably should have been, I looked at it and my God, if I do something that cuts off 30, 35, I've got this great time afterwards. And I think what's interesting is that what you're being offered is like a lifeline, because you have your competitive career and the I-Chuan will benefit that. But then when you get to the point when you can't compete anymore, you still have that practice going forward forever. Oh, yes. Which I don't know is the case with Muay Thai, because I've trained a bit of that myself, and I just think tremendously effective martial art in the ring. And you know, if you got into a real brawl, it would be useful. But then I didn't see many people in Thailand who were doing it, you know, past 40, you know, in any kind of meaningful way. But it
is very hard wearing on the body.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Full contact, full impact. And like I say, people have the ideology of you don't need it to maintain yourself. It's just kick.
Well, you're in a real minority.
I-Chuan.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're in a real minority, because I think most people who state their kind of the benefits of a style don't have the situation where if they're wrong, they're going to get hit in the face. You know what I mean? It's like if you put your faith in I-Chuan training and you go in the ring with it and you make a mistake, you're going to get hit and probably be damaged. Whereas most kung fu conversations are quite academic, normally online, or they feel saying, if you did this, and you're kind of actually going in and road testing it.
Oh yes, definitely.
Are you interested in MMA as well, or you're purely a stand-up fighter with the Muay Thai?
MMA interests us a little bit, but it's not something massively. I appreciate the grappling and things. I've done it in the past. I've done trained jiu-jitsu and things in the past, and I do appreciate the other arts involved in mixed martial arts, but I do prefer to stay on my feet and just get better at striking.
Well, it's really fascinating. I hope people are tuning into this and, you know, getting this fresh perspective, because otherwise what I hear or read or get told is uniformly, you know, why are you bothering to have a traditional Kung Fu school when, as you can see behind me, this is my school here, it's relatively old school, you know, and why are you doing that when you should be, you know, in the ring grappling with a dummy or whatever else you'd be doing for MMA. So I want to fit in as much as we can in this window of time. So the other thing I want to talk about, James, was as much as people would say that the form training is obsolete, probably with the weapons, they would say that even more so. So could you talk a bit about your philosophy for weapons? Show us maybe some weapons movements with, I know you're very good with the sword, and what is the relevance of that in the modern world?
Yeah, I think, I think most modern athletes, modern martial, we're on that subject now of talking about combat, they do ancillary training, supplementary training, whether it's kettlebells, or isometrics or TRX, or they will do something that's designed to strengthen their body, that they can apply and use that in their fighting experience. So, you know, when people say that Chinese martial arts, they don't have conditioning methods like this, of course they do. They've had stone blocks which are very similar to kettlebells since the turn of time. The weapons are an extension of the empty hand, as we've talked about before. Training weapons enhances the empty hand. Training empty hand enhances the weapons. So it should be a continuous circle before that goes around. So if I talk about a couple of different weapons here, again, Paul very well talked about the pole or the spear, which is so important in Chinese martial arts. I think this weapon is in pretty much every Chinese martial arts system. Of course, certain weapons, we always see the pole. Yin Yi Kun, which we talked about, it came from this on the battlefield, and that Paul demonstrated the Santi. But if we talk about things like a Bong Kun or a punch, okay, so I do a simple movement here, which becomes the same as this, a Bong Kun, or if I want to bring the staff around and down like this in a pet or I-Chuan or pet kun, like this. What I'm doing is looking at putting the energy into the end of the staff. So I can do that in a short movement. Now, if you tell me that, it's going to be very useful for when I punch. And again, we talk about the mind aspect, the intent. When I punch someone, I don't necessarily want to be punching them there at the back. I want to be punching 6 feet past, boom, here, okay? So by training with a weapon, I'm not just training my body, I'm training my mind. And I'm integrating them together to think, I'm here in the distance, boom. Yeah, and you're also training your tendons when you're doing that. You're maintaining your stance, you're training all of your muscles, your core body. So there's an aspect of that of course it applies into the empty hand. Weapons training is very, very, very important within our arts. So we have, of course, swords like you mentioned, throwing them around here. I-Chuan, we like to do the 5 elements with the gim or the saber or the broadsword. Okay, so again, a movement like a P or a chopping movement, as I was showing on Jack before, when we apply leverage, or I can do a Bong Chuan. And again, that's the application of a punch here, like this. So I'll show a little bit of form. Actually, I'm going to choose a small. So we have various different sizes of weapons as well, and weights. That's a kind of standard broadsword. Then you get onto a big beast like this, which is 5 foot and a little bit heavier. Now, I would of course always train a weapon like this outside, or I'm probably going to take Jack's head off and also more importantly, destroy all of my training room as well. So, but again, we can do the same thing here. I'll show it from the side angle on this kind of movement, and then chopping or I-Chuan, and also static jam jong can exist with a sword, which we can do through. You'll see it in outside bag jam, but they'll do circle walking in this position here using the sword. Okay, so that's a way of training the empty fist but using a weapon. Within my branch of I-Chuan, which comes from the Han brothers, there's a big influence of Chinese wrestling, of Sukga. So we use some very specific, well, you call them weapons, but really they're training drills, like this short stick, like this. So we do exercises here, training the body, which come from wrestling. Okay, or I may do one like this, which is mimicking the action of a shoulder throw, throwing your opponent, but you use that as a training tool for building power. And there's also stepping drills that would come with this as well. So if I borrow Jack again for 1 second, with the stick, I'm trying to use my whole body, integrated power, and not break the structure. So, you know, a lot of people talk about leading with the arms, not using your whole body. So by practicing a simple stepping exercise like that, if we're in that kind of clinch wrestling, we're talking about that and that step, and I'm moving like this, yeah, simple stuff. Before that in Chinese martial arts, cowboy, baibo, inward, outward stepping. But how often would that happen in a real fight? If we start fighting here, then he grabs here. I want to move in. So practicing that with the stick in a mindful way, also correct. So I'm not moving my arms first. It's the whole body structure. Very relaxed. But again, we be able to produce that power through relaxation and through intent. That gives you a little bit of a view on how we train weaponry.
Got you. Something that came up in Paul's discussion about the fact that probably if you go back and talk about battlefield martial arts, or even martial art in a modern, in an ancient environment with no rules involved, I guess the best thing would be you'd start with a weapon and work your way back to empty hands. And I've always found it curious, because I always thought that if you took away the weapon from a weapon technique, you would have hand techniques that were similar to those that you find. Do you subscribe to that, or do you think the
100%? 100%. Yeah. Okay. So if you take what I was talking about with the game before. So if we take something like this kind of movement here, okay, in I-Chuan, this is I-Chuan. Now, if you look at the hands and how they move, that would be like a crossing punch here.
Right.
Exactly the same. Yeah, it's about directions of force. It becomes less about technique, and it becomes how you apply it. But for example, fire element or I-Chuan, there's an upward force here, chopping coming like that. We have that in the empty fist form here. Application wise, or Jack again for 1 second. This movement here of rising, okay, he hits. It's like an emergency self-defense.
Yeah,
it's a guard, it's a shell from here, okay. If I have, we have a phrase that 2 hands is always better than 1. So the support of pressing my hand into my elbow here, it's like a oh shit covering here, but I'm in a very good position then to just turn or gua wrapping, and then be able to punch him here or do whatever I want. So that rising comes up to here. That's absolutely applied within the weapon. So yeah, 100% subscribe to that.
So we're getting, that's very interesting, and that's something that I think what I wanted to try to do with the convention is that we would actually have themes and ideas that would, basically be either agreed with or denounced from session to session. That's very interesting to see that idea, because I don't know if that's been widely circulated, the idea of Kung Fu starting with a weapon and moving back towards empty hands. The other thing I wanted to raise with you is that, and again, this is part of, I think, what gives internal arts a bad impression to non-practitioners of the internal arts, is that there are great claims made of supernatural skills, supernatural levels of ability through Qigong practice, light body skill, setting things on fire by use of your mind and whatever. And but I remember, and you're a very level-headed guy, I was asking you, and you told me about one experience you had with one of your teachers in Beijing, and I wonder if you want to tell us about that. I know you're not basically saying, hey, everybody, we're all going to train to that level, but what did you experience with him? Can you just tell the story?
Yeah. And again, backdrop on it, I think, one of the issues we've talked about on credibility is too many people have gone down this path of self-belief, and it doesn't lead into a good place. So,
right.
My almost 15 years training full-time in Hong Kong, and then I spent a lot of time in China and Taiwan. I've met many masters who've made many claims. And whilst I've never gone anywhere to specifically make anybody look bad or debunk them, I come from a scientific background. So I always look for logic, body mechanics and everything else. But nevertheless, you brought this thing up, Bey. So this one guy who was a direct student of, he sadly passed away now, as many of the old masters who I've trained with and met have. So I guess it would have been about 15 years ago that I met him. He was a lovely man in his 90s in Beijing, direct student of the founder of I-Chuan, and we were having lunch together and talking. And funnily enough, for this gentleman, is he spoke really good English, which is incredibly rare of people. He'd gone to an American school when he was a kid in Beijing, and I didn't expect that. So that had blown me away. So to be able to talk in my native language to a first generation student of Wang Shanzhai was incredible. And so kind of halfway through the lunch, he just he told me, he said, I also I help people with cancer treatment and use some of the energy that I can produce in my body. And I was like, okay, fine. And he said, do you want to see how I apply and use a little bit of that in a combat kind of way? And I was, okay, great. Well, you're offering it up, but I'm almost kind of saying in my head, I'm not going to jump 6 feet back here. I'm not going to do something that's going to make it. This could be a little bit of an awkward moment that we now go into. But anyway, yeah, sure, do it. So we stood up, and he and I've had a lot of people try and do these things before me in the past, by the way. Always been unsuccessful. I had some very embarrassing conversations. So he placed his finger on me. So he had touch, and I felt what can only be described as a really strong electric shock, like a bolt that came into my body, and it pushed me way back and over. But it was a sudden force. So I would say my explanation of that would be that his skill level or his Kung Fu was so high that he could produce this force from his body because he had trained his entire lifetime, got into with minimal movement for it to happen, and basically using his body as a conduit for this force to travel through and come through. So I still don't believe that was anything particularly, chi or weird around it.
You don't believe it's supernatural. You think it's a higher level of the natural.
I think it's an incredibly high level that very, very, very few people will ever. But you have to remember, back in the day when I've met several first generation students of the founder, they trained 8 hours per day. We talk about now, I have my students, and I train 2-3 hours a day, and we train in very, very low, painful jam positions. These guys were doing it for 8 hours per day over multiple years. And then back in that era, like we talked about, they were combative. So they were doing lots of other stuff as well. So this Kung Fu training is very, very special. You train it to that level. And who does that these days? Who really genuinely trains that hard? Because they were training for war. They were military guys. So this is 100 years ago. As Jack would now doing, 5-6 hours a day before a fight. You're fighting in next month. you know, he'd be doing 10K runs and CrossFit stuff and things like that. So these guys were doing the concrete thing, the 20 things we've been talking about. And I just believe that that's still such. In the modern day, we can't do that kind of time.
Right. How are we doing for time, huh? 2 minutes. Any questions from the floor? James, this has been amazing. We're just getting down to the last few minutes. Question from the floor, which is, okay, so when you kind of, do you intend to anoint one protege to carry on after you, or would the art, after you are less involved in the years to come, will there be a group of people sharing it, or do you have one specific protege?
So that's a good question. I mean, I am at the moment, I have quite a few students in different countries. I have 3 that teach for me. And I think I've still got a few years left, by the way.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I'm not planning on retiring or dying yet. But so I don't know. I mean, ask me in another kind of 30 years.
Right.
But with the history on with Jack. So in January, I'm going to be doing a regular class within the Muay Thai gym to the professional fighters, which is going to be once a week. So I'm also interested to see who else is going to come through. I don't have any very young students. It's difficult to teach kids this stuff. Even my own kids. So that's something in the future that, of course, that I would love. But I don't have an intention that it should only go from 1-to-1. I think, as we talked about, it's not in a great place, Chinese martial arts. No. Everyone on here loves them, but to the outside world. So the more people we can show the real stuff to, the more we can spread that. Get rid of the secrets and everything else. Get rid of all the BS. Get the good stuff out there. Just throw it all out there to everybody. So I would hope that I'd have several people to be able to pass it through to.
And I think there's hope, because I remember when I was a kid, back when the dinosaurs roamed the land, nobody had heard of yoga. No one did yoga. They'd heard of it as something strange Indian people in loincloths did in the Ganges. But nobody knew anybody who did yoga. And in my lifetime, this was probably in my teens. So let's say 40 years had passed. And suddenly everybody's either doing yoga, knows somebody who has tried yoga. There's 5 yoga studios in walking distance. And my takeaway from that is, I don't think yoga changed that much, but it somehow was made to be relevant, to seem relevant to modern people. And somehow, particularly with what you're doing, I feel it's the same challenge. It's like you've done with Jack. If you can make it relevant to somebody, then it becomes part of their lifestyle. And that's happened with another mind, body, spirit practice. So I feel we have a shot with Kung Fu. How do you think?
I do, and I think I think we do. I think it's still finding its place. I think that one of the good things in the modern world with social media, I believe it was Abraham that mentioned before with the project that you guys are working on, that it really keeps the credibility and it gets rid of the charlatans. Back in the day, you'll remember, there was a lot of charlatans in Chinese martial arts as well. Nowadays, a teacher puts his or her stuff out there. You can very easily research them and do due diligence. Who did they learn from? When did they learn? How long did they learn from? What have they done? And that's a really good thing. So in some ways that will bring the quality level out, and people call out BS now more because of the combat sports and fighting. So I think that's a really good thing. So I think if we can look at, there's more similarities in everything that we do than differences. We've already seen that today. All the weapons. So rather than traditionally in Chinese martial arts, we've looked for divisions and we've segregated. We've probably been our own worst enemy. But there's really good people out there who, I love all Chinese martial arts. I'm a geek. I love studying different systems as well. I love, I'm still a student at heart. And when you look for the commonalities and how we can all share and work together, I think that's a really good thing as well.
I think most people don't really care that much about being able to beat up 10 guys. They want the quality of their own day-by-day existence to be enhanced. And for the other practices like, Reiki, yoga, shiatsu, all these other Asian practices, which have succeeded in this. I mean, obviously there's a massive interest in Buddhism, meditation, even sectarian meditation without any religious aspect. That's all kind of like been absorbed in the West. And I think Kung Fu stayed in the ghetto. And I think you've hit the nail on the head when, we're our own worst enemy. And you'd open up some of the martial art magazines. I can't think of any come to mind, but if they, some of those martial arts magazines, and they would all be like, Master Wong hates Master Wing. And I think people don't, they don't care, really. They didn't care about that.
They
But
don't.
anyway,
It's
James, I can't wait to come to visit you again. I'm getting kind of homesick for the place.
You're always welcome, you know that. You're always welcome.
Jack, thanks so much, Jack, for coming in and participating. It really was fascinating. And again, I don't know that I've ever seen that conversation happening before of somebody who's a current kickboxer coming in and talking about internal arts. So I think that would be inspiring for people. So thank both of you, and I'll see you soon. We'll be up there soon. Okay.
Right. Thanks, Bey.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.